Hello, and welcome to the Viva La Vulva podcast. I am your host, Dr. Cara Quant, and I would like to thank you for joining us today on this podcast episode. I have a special guest on the episode today. Her name is Eurydice. And I will call her Yuri throughout this discussion. But we actually collaborated a couple of months ago on her podcast, Speak Sex. She's also an artist, and you can see the art. If you guys are watching the YouTube video, you can see the art that she has in the background that she's done herself. She's also authored 3 books. And so she's just an overall awesome person, and is passionate about empowering sexuality, empowering women's sexuality. So we are definitely on the same wavelength. And I thank you for joining us today on this episode.
Oh, thank you for having me, Cara, and thank you for what you're doing. I'm a great fan, and I think that just being willing to like give your free time to share knowledge, with everyone out there is so valuable. So I appreciate, with all of my heart, and I'm happy to be here.
Yes, I mean, it's such an important discussion. Like I remember growing up and like being afraid to talk about down there, quote unquote down there, to talk about my vagina and vulva and like the changes that were going on in a period. And so I feel like it's like there's no shame in it. It's a normal, natural process. Masturbation is normal. Like there's so many things that are taboo, or just disempowered within our society. And I'm like, it doesn't need to be the case. Like we can have a open and honest dialogue about it and really educate people, men and
Yeah,
women, and everyone in between
yeah,
about
yeah. And I feel that unfortunately, our education is kind of like a little bit, you know, gatekept, so it's the privileged few get to the universities, especially the top universities, and get like a wider education. And then, the people who are not, able to participate in that, get their education from like whatever, reality TV, which perpetuates the stereotypes, and the cliches and
it.
the hierarchy, this kind of like what we call, what we feminists call the patriarchy, the domination of the male of the species over the female, which is kind of like the culture we came out of, the culture we were trained in, but it like no longer really has any meaning. It feels to me like it's collapsed, except for like the optics, like all the different systems and names are still in place, but like their essence is gone,
Yeah,
so it's like way obsolete. Like we've outgrown it. It's exhausted itself,
yeah,
um, so part of this conversation is helping women understand that we have the power, and we actually also, in this country at least, have the freedom, to be whole beings again, and not to need to get you know uh, approval or identity through a relationship with a male.
yeah,
And I feel that the original kind of like reason for this was because women had this extra gift, right? So in the beginning of time, let's say, or at least in the beginning of patriarchal time, um, you know women had the gift of birth, of procreation, of the fruits of the vulva,
yeah,
um, which are the most important, right? Creative product of the species. That's how we go on existing,
yeah.
and also the most
Everyone came out
fulfilling.
of a vulva.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also the most fulfilling. Like, what's more fulfilling than giving birth? Those feelings, the emotions, the hormonal like high. Um, so I feel that, the male kind of like wanted to control, and it makes sense to me, had this need to control the line, the lineage. Otherwise, the male of the species would be kind of like completely useless or powerless, right? So for that reason, a whole system of hierarchies was set up so that, women who could overpower, who were not as strong as the men, would be kind of like owned in a way, by some men who then could make sure that the children are his. So that's how like this whole thing, was set up. And once that hierarchy came up, then all kinds of other systems, followed, like including, slavery. They were all systems that were based on that, first kind of like control of one type of human being over another type of human being. So, and here we are, it's like the third millennium, and we have like DNA paternity tests, and we have like sperm banks, and we have in vitro widespread, and we have like surrogate moms, and
So,
we have
yeah.
more than half marriages ending in divorces, right? We have like serial marriage, people marrying over and over different. We have like 2-day marriages, instant divorce. It's just like it's lost its meaning, and there's no longer like a need for it,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
I mean, same-sex marriage has been amazing that way, because like we started talking about marriage equality. And so it's just about kind of like rearranging the way we think, but about normal, you know
Yeah.
so I
And
feel that.
there's no new normal. I mean, well, yeah, like normal is nothing. Like, yeah, what
Right,
exactly is
exactly.
considered
Yeah,
normal?
yeah,
Because there's so much diversity that is out there.
exactly.
There's so much
Yeah,
diversity.
yeah. And to me, like, that's the beauty of America. Like, norm is a statistical term. So what the majority of people believed was not appropriate became assumed to be the norm. But like in America, because we're so diverse and multicultural, and a place of like constant movement and immigration and change, that majority is like tiny. So it's it makes it very hard to hold on to some kind of like norm,
Yeah.
right? Which is liberating. So it's really kind of like for me, it's just about taking a moment every day to kind of like think before we react, and think about what we really who we really are, and what our knee jerk fears are that were fed to us by our parents or teachers who lived in a different century, and had grown up in different conditions,
Yeah.
and then choose what may be a little harder, but also freeing, but also more authentic. Um, so yeah, kind of like being able to speak about sex and sexuality in open, which used to be associated with like shame and discomfort, is one of those practices. It's not the only one, but it's definitely kind of a very simple way
Yeah.
to like take off the layers of like things that you didn't choose, that were kind of like forced on you, in your youth
Yeah.
or early childhood from the outside.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever read Come As You Are. Um,
Yeah,
yes, which is a book by Emily. See, I'm never really good at authors' names, but
yeah.
Nagoski. I think that's her last name. Yeah. But she talks about a garden, and we all have theoretical gardens where it's about sexuality, and we've over time throughout our lives we've planted different things within this garden, and at some point in your life, or at this point now in your life, you can decide what you have, what you keep in your garden, and what you decide to take out of your garden because it no longer serves you. And so I thought that that was such um, a great thing to share with people, is that we can make it however we want, especially as women and as vulva owners. We can decide what we keep in our garden and what we take out, like what no longer serves us. And the discussion around sex and like asking for pleasure and speaking up for what we want and being authentic are all things that I would like to put in my garden.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want that.
Yeah. Well,
And
it's like,
yeah, I'm happy with
the old question of like, what is a weed, and really a weed is what you think is what you don't want.
that. Yeah,
That's what you pull out.
that's what you pull out. That's what you take
Yeah.
out. Yeah,
Yeah.
by natural pesticide or natural things. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's we can decide to take that out for sure.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
wanted to get into like what got you started in having these discussions about sex. Like what, is there like a story, something that happened in your past that got you into having these discussions
Mm.
and starting the podcast?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm naturally, I was kind of born creative. I'm a triple Pisces, so
Hey,
that's all.
triple.
Yeah. So, given that, I feel that my writing, my, publishing, my work as a journalist, my teaching, my art, my stitching, my painting, the podcast are all part of my overall art practice. And I don't believe in like those strict categories. I feel that part of the problem of what I call the patriarchy is that it likes to divide things and pose us in binary differences. um, and that's a basic example. I do all of these things, but when someone asks me what are you, I can't come up with one word because they imagine one tiny thing, right? So um, it's it's like the old question of like, who am I first? Am I a mother? But if I say I'm a mother, that doesn't give me enough value, so I have to put myself in some prefab category where I'll get like respect, in the world, in the in what I call the men's world. But my story is that I was I'm my mom, my grandma, they were all breeders. They married super young the men that their fathers chose, and had babies. And so I was my mom's first baby. She was newly married. She didn't know anything about sex, or she didn't know her husband. Or so my first memories are like my mom always crying when my dad was out of the house. And she couldn't handle me, didn't know anything, so she was kind of like unconsciously abusive. um I was unwanted, because I was kind of like the symbol of her bondage. She wanted to go back home and be with her mommy. She was like 18.
Wow.
And she didn't want to like be, raising a kid or washing clothes, cleaning the house, or like it was just too much. So I witnessed that, and to kind of escape my world, I taught myself how to read, like my little children's books that they had got me. I broke my leg and I was in bed for like 6 months. And so I noticed that when I became really fluent with words, I got a lot of attention. Like my dad suddenly paid attention to me, and then he would bring other people, and kind of like show me off because I had like memorized things, and I could speak the language of books. So I felt empowered. And it took me, my dad would like worked for the junta at the time. He would take me to like recite Homer, the Odyssey in front of like the minister or something. um it took me quite a while to realize that that was not me, that was like a male world that I was just like kind of, taking on as my own.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So there were like two formative realizations. One was that when I was like in maybe fifth grade, my teacher told me the meaning of the word lesbian and why it was so bad. And I was born on the island of Lesbos, but then we moved to Athens. You know, both my parents were born on the island of Lesbos, so they were all lesbians. We moved to Athens. I knew that I shouldn't say that I'm a lesbian, but I didn't know why. But I felt like I should be ashamed. And then when my teacher explained it to me, I felt like doomed, you know, damned, like, you know, I'm born this way.
Because of where you were from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. It didn't
Yeah.
even mean, and you know, like I was a child. I didn't have a sexuality at all. But the word, because of the ancient poet who wrote about loving women, you know, meant a homosexual woman, but it wasn't even, you know, homosexual. It was kind of a demeaning,
Yeah.
right? um so that was like one of the awarenesses that, you know, the language, like, you know, doesn't represent me. And I was like kind of like hating, you know, my body. And then when I began to enter puberty and I started to masturbate, you know, once again I felt like I'm going to hell. This is like the gravest secret, and it's the
Yeah.
most horrific, you know, like how could I be such a deviant? um I had no name for it, you know. I had no words for like the vagina or the clitoris or anything. There was nothing, you know. I just wished I could be a boy and fit. um then you know, like when I started uh, hanging out with potential boyfriends, you know, my dad suddenly became very strict and kind of turned on me, and all of his support for my like intelligence became extreme oppression, because he, you know, because I was like making choices that were not his, and I wasn't like you know, repeating his narrative, and I wanted to hang out with like other, you know, males, like boys my age. I mean, I didn't do, you know, I clearly um, in that world, which was very paternalistic and old world in Greece, you know, I was completely, you know, naive. So at the age of 15, I basically ran away and went from the Greek island. I was there to Los Angeles, um,
It's
and
strange.
it was pretty amazing. It was like I'd landed on another planet.
Yeah.
I had got a passport because I have like a cousin in New York, and she was getting married that summer, and I was gonna go to the wedding with my dad, and then he couldn't afford it or something, so he went alone to the wedding. So I had got a passport, um, and you know, I saved my like lunch allowance, like I didn't buy lunch for like a year and a half at school.
Yeah.
Got a ticket, got on TWA, didn't tell my parents, and like arrived in Los Angeles. Um, and it was like it was amazing. So, and I'm you know, I met a lady who at the library, like literally within a day, who in this like, you know, great generosity of Americans, you know, said, "Oh, I love Greece. I've been there many times. I like the Greek dance. You can stay with me until you figure it out."
What?
Uh,
I always
you know,
believe
and then it
the
was I
universe.
stayed. I just
Yeah.
stayed for like a year.
Wow. I always believe the
He took
universe
me.
is on our side, you know, like if you just leap and that was your leap from Greece
Oh my
to
God. Yeah,
LA and you
yeah.
were completely supported.
I was so supported and
Wow.
so protected, you know, looking back, because of course at 15, especially when you live in such a cloistered, you don't know the dangers. You know, I had no idea like how bad it could be.
Yeah.
um, so I went to Redondo Union High School. She enrolled me because she lived in near there,
Yeah.
and graduated a year later. And But I remember like within 2 weeks of having landed, I was at Rocky Horror Picture Show with some of like the students, um, my, you know, the high school students.
Yeah.
and I just cannot tell you the culture shock, the change, of like watching Rocky and watching the audience react and play act it. And I mean, for me, I had landed like in paradise, but also, coming from another culture, um, it helped me understand that all of these things we take for granted are just made up by other humans
Yeah.
like us.
Yeah.
The words we speak, the meaning we give them, the things that we consider, right and wrong. We just made them up. It was just not. It wasn't us. It was somebody else.
Yeah.
So we have that ability to kind of like rewrite our narrative.
Completely.
It's not like set in stone. It allowed me to kind of like see all those options, and it also allowed me to understand like the split that I was living between my mind and my body, because I was like so focused on my mind.
Yeah.
It was what I was getting approval for,
Yeah.
right? That I had no, like, I wished I didn't have a body. I didn't want to be a girl, but it wasn't like even gender dysmorphia, like embodied. It wasn't like I want to have a penis. No, it was just like the power dynamic in society was such
Mm.
that I just felt that the my 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 body, and especially my vulva, would automatically devalue me, like make me a less important person, a less respected person.
Wow.
um, right.
Wow.
So I just fought. I had resisted it for a long time, and when I would get like urges and desires, I would try to suppress them, because my understanding of interpersonal relations was that if I allowed myself to like fall in love, I would become immediately, I would get like under the control of whoever I loved,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it was a complicated process in trying to unravel all that and understand it, and then like give my body, the same value as I did to my mind, which was like trained by the Maya language, and fit perfectly.
Yeah.
um,
And so
was a
it's,
process. It was a long process. And
yeah.
so that's been my basically, it's been my work. Like when I was 21, I think I told you, when I was 21, I wrote a book called F32 about this split. And it was about the vagina. It's a story of a girl and her vagina, and she gets attacked in the street. Someone cuts out her vagina, and then the vagina has like a life of its own, and it goes to like talk shows and museums, and no one knows what it is. So it no longer has like the judgment and the shame and the like,
Yeah, because it's on its own.
the
Like it's
down
okay.
there thing,
Yeah.
because it's on its own, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
So
So
then
I
at
feel like,
the
was
end,
that like a therapy? Like, did it feel almost
right.
therapeutic for you to write this book about a vulva on its own?
It was
Yeah.
so therapeutic. And also, so it was published, and then it did well. It was translated in many languages. And so what was even more therapeutic is that I had to read from it. I had to stand there and say the word vagina or cunt or, pussy in front of strangers, and say it, in a positive way.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. It wasn't easy. I had to kind of like reclaim it again and again, right? But
And I think even to
definitely,
this day, because you said that you wrote that book when you were in your 20s.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even to this day, I have friends that I've spoken with, and they say, like I have a product that I'm talking to people about investing in, and we're talking about vulvas and vaginas, and it really does still to this day,
Oh
2020,
yeah.
uh, shock people and like, make people a little intimidated or embarrassed or, so even the word today affects people.
Yeah. And there is definitely, yeah, and there is stigma, and there is you know which to me is insane. Like with our logic, you know that's our power as women. We give birth through the vagina. We feel the urge to even have sex in order to conceive, in order to give birth, through the vagina, right?
Yeah.
That should be like our, that's like the closest to the divine, in a sense, that we have. And yet it's so like devalued in our culture. I mean, even my daughter, she's now 20.
Mhm.
I have only one. And she says, and she's a feminist, of course. I mean, she's my daughter, you can imagine. It doesn't matter, I'm her mother. She's like, couldn't you have a different name for your podcast? Does it have to be Speak Sex? Like, why couldn't it be Speak Literature or Speak Art? Or like, I don't want my friends, I can't even like, I don't want to promote it. What are my friends gonna think with my mom speaking sex? You know what I mean?
Thing. Yeah.
It's just so deep. It
Yeah.
runs deep. You gotta fight it and unlearn it. And so that's why we're doing all of this,
Hmm.
right? To
Actually,
change things.
yeah, and that's a good kind of segue about speaking sex to uh, your children. Like how did you, or I'm assuming you have, but how did you like even start the conversation about sex with your daughter? Because I feel like that's a huge thing that many parents um, are considering and they want to do, but they're very nervous about it. I know my parents were. I know my mom was. My dad didn't even touch the subject.
Oh
And
yeah.
my mom gave me a book on it about how to
Mm.
talk with your teenager about sex. And she was like, if you have any questions, let me know. And it was, it was her way of doing it. It was her way of introducing me to it. But I think that there was still some shame in having that discussion with me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that's another one of those like weird things that I feel the patriarchy came up with, and I mean Freud put it in specific terms, but it's been there a long time, but that whole like, incest, I don't want to say taboo, because of course incest is an act, is taboo, but like it's so inconceivable, like to me, the fact that we're so paranoid about it seems crazy, like, you know f- in all the families I know, and I've met thousands and thousands and thousands of people in my life, like, you know it's just not done, like, so. But I feel that that taboo is another one of those things, that like if we speak to our children, there is like some kind of creepy feeling or connotation, as if we're like sexualizing each other.
Yeah.
And so part of like what I'm doing with the Speak Sex is, putting the emphasis on the speak. Speaking sex is not the same as having sex.
Yeah.
It's very different.
Yeah.
We're none of us are, having sex. We're just, you know, and yet it's easier there are people for whom it's easier to have sex than talk about it.
Yeah.
Which is again insane. Um, but to get back to your question, I mostly taught my daughter through her friends, in the sense that she would get a little squeamish, um, uh, and I focused on talking to them when they were in group, because then they felt safer, so they all received it much better. So like that's one
Yeah.
kind of like concrete advice. My
Yeah.
home was always full of like girls, because I was like the cool mom, so they all pretty much lived in my house. And I would just bring up these topics, and everybody else who was not my own daughter was super excited and had
Yeah.
a million questions.
Yeah.
I always wanted to explain things from the point of view of feminism, of how to kind of like not confuse, being sexual with making your partner happy, or kind of like serving or service or separate, going out of body and like surviving it, or all of those things, right?
Yeah.
um and I did give them, concrete advice, but I about porn, about, how to speak about it, again, kind of like overcoming, breaking the fear of speaking about it, the fear of like being rejected or judged if you
Yeah.
speak about it and say, I actually like this, which sounds, again, logical, but one-on-one, like facing the person you want or want to be liked by, is still very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that many women, and I know like for myself, in the past, I've wanted permission, like requesting permission to be myself, to be more authentic, to speak up for what I want. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes we just have to handle it ourselves and have that discussion or ask for what we want one on one, right in front of the person.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because, there's so many strong women, um, and, including women of color, and, can be really strong in their relationships, in their family dynamics, and assertive. But then when it comes to like one-on-one with a partner, they kind of like let the partner, figure it out,
Yeah.
or, be in charge. And it's like, no, just be you, which is like continue to be in charge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How
Yeah.
simple is that?
Yeah, I mean, because our partners cannot read our minds, even though we want them to. But our partners cannot read our minds, and so that is, yeah. Being assertive is also, I think, being assertive sexually. And I also do believe, and I actually just read something about you being assertive in your sexual life makes you assertive in your actual life, like in other parts of your life you could be more assertive just by being assertive in the bedroom.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. But, and also, another way to see it is that being assertive speaking, is a sign of like respect and trust. If you tell your partner what you like or what you think about or fantasize, or what you don't like or what you don't enjoy that he is doing or that he wants to do, um, shows that you respect your partner enough to trust them to accept it well, to not like run off, or be so superficial that
Yeah.
that would change the, the dynamics or the essence of your relationship, of your love, of your romance. So to me, it's a sign of, it's an embrace, instead of like an attack. you know uh, it's this, it's a different way of seeing it. But I think that, women need to speak up, and, thankfully we've come a long way speaking up about our, abuse, or, victimhood. But it would be, you know it's also good to speak up about our joy and
Yeah,
our,
for sure.
our desires. Not only, saying no, which is very important,
Yeah.
but once we've managed to, to say no, to understand that we have to consent, um, then we can also begin to say yes, from that same place.
Yeah. Yeah, which is very powerful. Yeah, it's very powerful. And I know, like, for myself, having a dialogue in the beginning of a relationship about what I like, about what I don't like, about what my, like, I will not do, and also having it from the other person, what they like, what they don't like, what they'll never do, like what their boundaries are, really does set a foundation for a healthy sexual relationship. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for
and
sure.
also sober, which is another issue, because when you have that conversation, when if we have a conversation like that, we tend to be sober.
Yeah.
And so often people kind of are not sober when they are having, at the begin when they're embarking on a new sexual relationship, because it's embarrassing and it's stressful, and it gives them anxiety, and then it makes it harder to speak actually and talk, like, even if they intended to, um, if they're not sober. So it's good to kind of like separate the time.
Mm.
You don't need to like say, oh, I am crazy about you, I want you, let's go do it, let's take off our clothes, and then, okay, stop, I will tell you the story of my sex life. There is like, you can you can find like better ways to incorporate it all, in like the courtship, whatever you want to call it, the early stages of getting to know each other.
Yeah.
um, and definitely it's important to watch for how the person you are attracted to responds, and how much attention they pay, whether or not they stay with that, or kind of like try to change what you've just said into their version. um, it's important to choose people who have space, for us, who have a lot of space for our, difference, for our, truth, who
Yeah.
kind of like don't um, don't think, okay, that's what she said, but she really means what like I want. So that's something to be aware of and watch for, not just only what we say, but also how what we say is heard. It,
Yeah.
you know.
And which I was going to ask you, like, how? I just posted something recently on Instagram about like how to have a conversation with your partner around sex, and so I wanted to ask you, like, what is your advice to people that are a little nervous about speaking sex, talking about what they want and desire in a sexual relationship? Like, what is some advice that you give others about speaking sex with a partner?
um, Well, I mean, I could go on and on. So, because there's so many facets to that. It's not something that you want to do once only. It's something that you want to kind of like, bring up a lot, often, because we change. And when you first meet someone, you probably are gonna think of yourself as the person you were with your previous partner, and they are probably thinking that you're going to be their previous partner. So, but we evolve and change all the time. Our sexual tastes change, the way like our tastes in food change, or colors, or decor, or perfume, or whatever. We're not kind of like stuck. So I think that one of the uses of speaking sex is that it frees us from being like stuck and invested in an identity that we got to speak, and then that's it. Because like I don't want to like change my story. Like it was already hard enough saying this is what I like, and I don't want to say
Now, this is
maybe I like something else
yeah,
more, or I don't like that, or I don't want that, or now I want, so um I feel like making it clear that all of this is an experiment, a works, that it's a it's part of life. Everything changes, everything moves.
yeah.
Um,
But you know what?
so
I do want
have the
to emphasize,
conversation a lot,
yeah.
and the more you have the conversation, the less unnerving it is.
Yeah. And I think that that is a good thing to emphasize, is that we are always changing, and that the experiences that we want within sex can change. And I think that that's very important to emphasize, because I didn't think of that. I mean, I thought that, we we have a conversation once, maybe a couple times, and then like that's it. So it's good to know, not it's good to know, but that's good advice about it's an ever evolving conversation, and it's an ever
Yeah,
evolving desire because they can change. Yes, like
yeah,
you're saying.
yeah, yeah. And also, our language keeps changes. Like we hear, words that we didn't even think about on our own. Language is something that shifts and changes and improves. We're coining words, right? So even if you feel like you are a certain way, um for example, you don't really like polyamory, it feels like, a little like cheating, but then, like 6 months later, you read or hear or whatever about ethical monogamy, and that sounds better as a term, so you want to look into that, so like you Google that, right? So different terms that are new, one example is like the neopronouns. People were like very taken aback in the beginning if someone would say, I go by they them. It's like, why are you complicating things, right?
Yeah.
But then as it becomes more prevalent, or as different pronouns that are much more confusing, are asked for, and it kind of becomes, part of the culture. More people have started thinking, well, you know what, I may not, maybe I don't want to be a he or a she, like maybe I have more multiplicities in me, and that doesn't even mean that like I'm bisexual, but I kind of like not being stuck, so people's thinking about themselves sexually changes as they participate, in life.
Yeah.
And things that looked that felt, frightening or degrading, if seen from another light, are no longer, that unattractive, so we may want to try them. It's like, if you think about, being like spanked, that's just unacceptable. But if you think about, having been abused, and holding on to like trauma in your wherever, let's say, sexual area, and using the pain to reclaim that trauma and release it, you may want to try it, right? You may want to cry after, so you may think about what is aftercare. So it's just kind of like everything evolves and changes. And I think that it was unfortunate that we went through a period, um, where, it's part of our sexual liberation. We connected our identity to our sexual practices. I feel that that's not wise at all. Um, our sexual practice is private, and our identity is, public. So, kind of like, coming out, so to speak, is important for some people. But again, for me, like you can come out again and again and again. Like you should, you don't have to, you know, say this is what I am, and then, be stuck with that.
Yeah.
You could say I am asexual. I am going through a period where I'm kind of like spending time with myself, and now with quarantine, it's a good time to do that.
Yeah,
you
it's a
know,
very good time to do that.
yeah, like discovering sex toys or sex tech, or just like learning and thinking about my relationships, and figuring things out. And I don't want to, be sexual for, for a while. I just need a reset.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're going to be asexual for life,
Yeah. Hmm.
so it's the same with like, bigger choices
Yeah.
than, yeah.
And I was actually going to ask about labeling, because labeling is so prominent in our society, and it kind of helps to put someone in a certain box or in a certain box in our minds about what they are, who they are, and how they operate. um, which can also be it can be limiting. But I also think that it can be liberating. I remember when I first talked about me being bisexual, or like that is the term that I use now, as a shameful thing. But now I'm liberated by using it, and I'm okay with it. And, like my family is okay with it. And, and it almost doesn't even matter if people are okay with it or not. Like, that is who I am. That is how I express myself. And so, like, I feel like it can also be a liberating term, to use the pronouns they rather than using he or she, or, to use whatever terms that you want to. I feel like it can be limiting, but it also can be liberating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very, I think it's very liberating so long as like we ourselves, don't feel constricted by that, so like, I think being a bisexual is much more inclusive than being a, cis person, that, and even if you never end up fully exploring your homosexual side of your bisexual, just thinking of yourself that way is liberating, I feel. As an example, using just like the bisexual example, um or like, sapiosexual. Come on, like, who is not, who doesn't get like aroused or excited by someone's like unique intelligence. It's intelligence is what we call charisma, so like many of us are, sapiosexual, but just kind of like including that in our sense of ourselves, expands you. So I feel, and everything that we do that expands, is positive. And by expansion, like, it opens our heart, it makes us, um, it opens, it makes us people who accept and understand more, more of other people.
Yeah.
um so, in a way it unites us, right? Whereas if we stay if we stay in one category, stay in your little lane, whatever, then that constricts you, and this constriction doesn't even let you, like, breathe deep. And it certainly puts us in positions of like, defense, right? Or judgment, attack, all the time, which is just like not a happy, healthy way to live.
Yeah.
Life is short, and and it's not, and it's beautiful, and
You only live
I feel
once.
like, yeah, like, why are we alive if not to just, kind of like feel good? And feeling good, is a communal experience. You feel good with and through other people. You
Yeah.
don't, you don't feel good like alone
But you can also,
forever.
yeah, I mean, yes, I think community is what we need. Like, we need other people in our lives. And I also do think that it is, or at least for myself, being a Scorpio, being the person I am, there is times where I need alone, like I need my alone to go in nature, to go hiking, to meditate, to, what have you.
Oh,
Um,
me too. I need a lot of alone.
I need
A lot,
a
lot, lot,
lot,
lot.
which I also
But
think is a self-care thing.
well, it's also, like, a creative person needs alone time. Like, you
Yeah,
need to be alone with your thoughts. But that's what I mean is, I don't mean like in time spent with others. I
yeah,
mean, our, what feeds us is our being, in a whole, you
yes,
know
yeah,
and what's fulfilling, let's say, in your work, is that you help people. You work, but you don't just work for the money. You work because it gives you personal satisfaction when someone feels better,
yeah,
when you heal someone in any modality. And I think that that's just the very basic, definition of humanity. And that's like the positive, beautiful definition of humanity, that we feel happy, like in a together way.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like, it's part of something. I don't mean like I could be on my own, like Nelson Mandela was in prison in isolation, but what he was writing was for the whole, like through the whole. So it's not like how we like spend our time or our day. I'm just saying like
In terms
our
of life.
motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get it. Well, coming to the end, I wanted you
Okay.
to um, give a little bit of information about how people can stay in contact with you, or how people can learn about your work, you as an artist, your books, your podcast. So kind of wanting to know how people can stay in contact and with this, continuing to have this conversation.
Thank you. Yeah. So we are Speak Sex Podcast on Instagram, and Twitter, and Facebook.com Speak Sex Podcast. You can find the podcast on every platform, Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher. It's Speak Sex with Eve. Um, uh, and I'm Eve Eurydice. And the website is speaksexpodcast.com. My books are written under my name, Eurydice, and probably they're available on the website. I'm not sure. I have another website, eurydice.net. So my name is Eurydice, which is an ancient Greek name and Greek myth, and also my grandma's name. I wanted to show you like my art piece that's here.
Yes.
So like that's very
Beautiful.
typical of what I do. And it's again like women's art, and you can see the stitch, right? So it's like in real time, stitch by stitch. It's very meditative, and it builds new consciousness, and it gives us time to to be in ourselves. So I find it like but these are all women, for example, and it has helped me very much in my life.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
And it's
So
so
you
like, it's
can,
huge,
yeah,
and it's
no,
all
look at
done
how
by
like look
stitching.
at that. I know it's all by hand. It's just like yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, you have to head over to YouTube to watch the video version,
oh
because
yeah.
it is cool to see her stitched canvas of women's shapes and faces, and it's beautiful.
And I will, with your permission, I will post a video of this on my YouTube channel too.
Yeah, yeah.
So the Speak Sex podcast, yeah.
Okay.
Yay.
And then, so I was starting this tradition earlier in my podcast, and I wanted to continue it with having my guests leave some information, some uplifting or empowering information about the vulva. So, like a story or a fact or whatever you want about the vulva.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna, I mean, I could say many, but I do want to speak about giving birth, because I think that was the most fulfilling moment for me as a vulva. Um, the feeling of my child coming out was just such a wholeness, and the moment my water broke was definitely an orgasmic expression, and the whole process was as heightened and pleasurable um, and charged. It's like my labor was long, but like it's like a 2-hour orgasm. And I don't say that in a, I think that I try to say that in an empowering way,
Yeah.
because, we stupidly separate like birth from sex when they're like so connected.
Yeah.
um and I'm happy to to have given birth completely sober, in a jacuzzi with a midwife, no meds, under, in the rain here in Miami Beach.
That's pretty cool.
um and I do recommend to your listeners, if they can, to stay out of the hospital, because it's not an illness. It's a wellness, giving birth. And when you are super conscious, then your hormones and like the spiritual and the biological and neurochemical combination of all the factors that go into birth is just such an amazing pleasurable experience. So I think that was like when my vulva was most, um, you know, magically charged. you know, yeah,
Yeah, and that is like that actually reminds me of my mom having all of us, all five of us children at home without any
yeah,
meds, with the midwife.
yeah.
And so, and I think it was because she had her sister, my aunt, had such a bad experience when she went to the hospital. And so I would
Mm,
say out there, for anyone that is having a normal, healthy pregnancy, like doing it at home or doing it out of the hospital is definitely a way to go. If
yeah,
complicated birth or you need to have
yeah.
C-section, then it's
Well, you just
different.
make sure that your midwife is experienced and also has a relationship with like a doctor and
Yeah,
an emergency room.
yeah,
Um, my midwife always, videotaped all the births, for that reason. Just
yeah.
yeah, but she had given like 15,000 births when I met her. So um, it's just I feel that like the doctors. In the hospital, they're too quick with the drugs and the anesthesia, and they're also way too quick with like booking appointments and C-sections, because it's convenient for them and their scheduling. Birth is unpredictable,
Yeah.
and they just their time is money. Like they want to know when you're going to show up. And so staying away from that route is better for both of us. Like our child participates because, they are like pushing and doing the work. They
Yeah.
want to, they want to see you just as much as you want to see them. Um, and, you have a full, and clear, like understanding and memory of what this is that your body does. That's so extraordinary. So after like 9 months of, patiently like hosting this this like
Hosting,
other
yeah.
body, like that's one of the perks,
Yeah,
you know
yeah, and women have
yeah.
been doing it for thousands and thousands of years,
Oh
right? Like, we've
yeah,
been doing it even
yeah,
before hospitals were in place. Yeah,
yeah,
which is a powerful
yeah,
thing. So
yeah.
thank you so much, Yuri,
Thank
for
you for
being
having
on
me.
this podcast.
I love our talks. I love the
Yes.
previous talk. I love this one. That's why I wanted to. Yeah, it's nice. Thank you.
Yes, and we definitely, once this pandemic has come to a point where we can all get back together, it would be nice to collaborate with you in person. Maybe you could be a part of the next Viva la Vulva exhibit, or
I would love to. I would
yes,
love to.
with all of
Yes.
your vulva art and, like your art
Yeah,
on the
please think
wall.
of me. Yes.
Yes,
That's
definitely.
what we'll do. Yes, I'll
Okay.
be there.
All right. All right. Well, thank
Okay.
you everyone for listening to the Viva La Vulva podcast. Again, I am your host, Dr. Cara Quant. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, subscribe. Let your friends and family know about this source of empowerment for vulva owners and non-vulva owners. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Yuri, for being on the podcast. Bye.
Bye.